This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with a qualified professional before making any investment decisions.
Welcome to the Wire Weekly Roundup. The week in real estate presented in digestible bites. Hold on while our AI hosts take us on another ride through this week's top real estate headlines.
All right. Welcome back to The Wire, everyone. Glad to have you all back with us for another deep dive. You know, this week you've sent in a really interesting mix of reports and articles, all kind of circling around this question of, what's the state of play in real estate right now as we get further into April 2025?
Right.
And so our mission today is to go beyond just sort of summarizing those headlines, right? We want to really connect the dots for you.
Absolutely.
Whether you're, working in the industry every day or just following along with a keen eye, we're going to unpack what these trends actually mean. And we're going to be looking at a few things in particular. We've got some pretty notable shifts happening in who's buying property these days.
Okay. Interesting.
We've got the potential fallout from these tariffs that just went into effect.
Yeah.
How's that going to play out? Nobody's quite sure.
Right. A lot of uncertainty.
And then on top of all that, we've got some pretty big changes brewing within the real estate industry itself.
Wow. Okay. So a lot to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay, great. So let's kick things off by talking about who's actually buying homes right now.
Okay.
The National Association of Realtors, NAR, they've got their 2025 home buyers and sellers generational trends report out.
Yeah.
And there's some really eye-opening data in there. One of the big things that jumps out is that baby boomers, they're now the biggest group of home buyers.
Really?
42% of the market.
That's a pretty big chunk.
It is. It's a pretty significant jump, putting them ahead of millennials, who've actually dipped down to 29%. Now, last year, millennials were at 38%.
Wow. So that's a pretty big swing.
Yeah, big shift. And then Gen X is holding steady around 24%. And interestingly, the World Property Journal, they're also highlighting this, boomers on the rise, millennials kind of declining. So it begs the question, what's really going on here?
Yeah. What's driving that?
Is it just, numbers, like population size?
Yeah.
Or is there something deeper happening? Well, the NAR report actually gives us some really good clues.
Okay.
One of the big things they point out is how these different generations are paying for their homes. It turns out that a huge number of baby boomers, like half of the older boomers, the 70 to 78-year-olds, and 40% of the younger boomers, those in their 60s, they're buying their homes completely with cash.
Wow. No mortgage.
No mortgage, straight up cash.
Yeah.
Now, compare that to younger buyers, like over 90% of people under 44. They're relying on financing to get into a home.
Yeah. That makes a big difference.
It does. It's a massive advantage, right?
Absolutely.
In this market, if you can come in with an all-cash offer, it really puts you ahead of the game. And it kind of speaks to the amount of wealth that the boomer generation has built up.
Right. That makes sense.
So when we see them dominating the buyer pool, it's not just about they want to move. It's also they have the financial firepower to do so.
They can just make it happen.
Exactly. And they're not as vulnerable to these, swings in interest rates and stuff. Now, switching gears to millennials for a second.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that they're not all in the same boat, right?
Right. Of course.
And the reports actually highlight some key differences within that generation. So you've got the younger millennials, the 26 to 34-year-olds, who are still mostly first-time buyers, like 71% of them, according to NAR.
Okay.
But then you've got the older millennials, 35 to 44, and they're more likely to be repeat buyers.
Makes sense.
Often going for bigger, newer homes, putting down larger down payments. And the World Property Journal, they actually point out that these older millennials are often using the equity they built up in their previous homes.
Oh, smart.
To make these moves.
Yeah, leveraging their games.
Yeah, exactly. But it's clear that affordability is still a big issue, especially for those younger millennials who are trying to get their foot in the door for the first time.
Right. Saving up for that down payment is tough.
It is, especially when you're dealing with these higher borrowing costs, right?
Absolutely.
And it just goes to show you that, these generational labels, they can be a bit misleading.
Yeah.
Because there can be huge differences within a generation.
For sure.
In terms of their financial situation and what they can afford.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we've got Gen X kind of caught in the middle.
Right. Sandwiched between the two.
Yeah, they make up about 24% of buyers. And then NAR report, this is interesting. They point out that Gen X actually has the highest median household income.
Oh, really?
$130,000.
Wow. That's higher than the boomers.
It is, but here's the thing. They're also leading the trend in multi-generational home buying.
Oh, interesting.
21% of Gen X purchases are for multi-generational living, which means they're either, taking in aging parents, maybe adult children moving back in, or it's just, a way to save money.
Yeah, all under one roof.
Exactly. So even though they have higher incomes on average, they might also have more financial obligations to juggle.
Right, supporting multiple generations.
Exactly. And that kind of highlights how these, societal and economic shifts are reshaping how families live and what their housing needs are. Now, we can't forget about Gen Z, even though they're still a pretty small part of the market.
Okay.
Just 3% of buyers. But the NER report does give us a couple of interesting tidbits about them. Unsurprisingly, they have the lowest household income, which makes sense given, where they are in their careers.
Right, just starting out.
Exactly. And they seem to be drawn to older homes, maybe because those are more affordable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Getting at a lower price point. But here's a surprising stat. They have the highest percentage of single female home buyers.
Oh, really?
30%.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it could point to, young women prioritizing home ownership earlier. Maybe a greater sense of financial independence.
Yeah, maybe they're not waiting to buy with a partner.
Right, exactly. So even though their overall buying power is still pretty small, this could be a sign of a much bigger trend to come. Okay, so one of the big themes here is that the makeup of the home buyer pool is changing, right?
Yeah.
Boomers are really stepping into the spotlight, often with these, all cash offers.
Right.
And then you've got the younger generations. They're all kind of navigating the market in their own ways. With their own challenges and priorities.
For sure.
Now, let's switch gears for a second and talk about something that's adding a lot of uncertainty to the economy and the housing market.
Okay, what's that?
President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs.
Right, those just went into effect.
They did, April 2nd, and they're basically imposing this baseline 10% tax on most of our trading partners, and then a whopping 25% on imported vehicles.
Oof. That's a lot.
Yeah, and the World Property Journal, they're highlighting this as a big potential concern for both housing and mortgages. So what kind of immediate impact might we see?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is construction costs.
We saw in that Realtor.com piece with Joel Berner and Buddy Hughes from the NAHB that while Canada and Mexico got a pass on this new baseline tariff for some key building materials, like lumber and gypsum, which is used to make drywall, the tariffs that were already in place on things like autos, steel, aluminum, those are sticking around. And the NAHB, they estimated that those earlier tariffs could add almost $9,200 to the cost of a new home.
Wow, so these new tariffs are just piling on top of that.
Yeah, exactly. Even with those exemptions, it just adds another layer of complexity and potential cost increases down the line.
Right. Builders are probably going to have to pay more for certain materials.
Right.
And then they'll have to pass those costs on to the buyers.
It's a domino effect. And then it's not just about the cost of materials, right?
What else is there?
We have to think about the bigger economic picture, especially the impact on inflation.
Right.
And what that means for mortgage rates.
Okay, yeah.
Economists are worried that these tariffs, especially in the long run, could really fuel inflation.
And if prices keep going up, the Fed might not be able to lower interest rates as much as they'd like.
Exactly. They might even have to raise rates to try to get inflation under control. And that would obviously make it even harder for people to afford homes.
Well, higher rates mean higher monthly payments.
Exactly. And Chen Zhao from Redfin, he even went so far as to say that every time tariffs go up by 1 percentage point, inflation could go up by 0.1%. And unemployment could rise too.
So it's a ripple effect across the whole economy.
It is. It's not just about the housing market. But here's the weird thing. In the immediate aftermath of these tariffs being put in place, Redfin reported that mortgage rates actually dipped a little.
Really?
Yeah. As of April 4th, the average 30-year fixed rate was 6.55%, which is the lowest it's been in 6 months.
Wow. So tariffs go up, rates go down.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive.
It does.
But what do you think is going on there?
Well, it could be that this drop in rates is just a short-term reaction
The market's still trying to figure out what these tariffs actually mean.
Right. Everyone's a little jittery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And investors might be moving their money around, and that can affect bond yields, which then influence mortgage rates. But I think, like Chen Zhao was saying, it's really a wait-and-see situation. This initial dip might not last.
If inflation starts to take hold.
Exactly. And the potential for higher inflation from the tariffs could end up outweighing this little blip in the long run.
So it's a bit of a mixed bag right now.
It is. A lot of uncertainty. And in looking ahead to April 2025 specifically, when it comes to interest rate predictions, Rick Sharga from CJ Patrick Company, he made a good point. He said the market's kind of in a holding pattern right now.
Makes sense.
Everyone's waiting to see how these economic policies, especially the tariffs, how they actually shake out before we can really get a sense of where rates are headed.
And we've seen some pretty big swings in rates over the past few years.
Absolutely. So any prediction is just a guess at this point.
Right. Lots of variables at play.
So the bottom line when it comes to tariffs and their impact on mortgages is that there's a ton of uncertainty.
Yeah.
We might see these short-term fluctuations.
Yeah.
But this possibility of higher inflation, it's a real concern.
It is.
And it can make it harder for people to afford homes down the road. So definitely something to keep a close eye on.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to some of the changes that are happening within the real estate industry itself.
Okay, what's going on there?
Well, NAR recently made a decision about the clear cooperation policy. And it's causing quite a stir. They decided to keep the policy in place, but they're introducing this new delayed marketing option.
Okay, what's that about?
It's called the multiple listing options for sellers policy. And the deadline to implement it is September 30th. And this has folks like Andrew Flackner, the CEO of Real Scout, and Jack Miller from T360. They're both saying that this is creating a lot of uncertainty in the industry.
I can see why.
Yeah. So for those who might not be familiar with the clear cooperation policy.
Yeah, remind me.
It basically requires brokers to submit a listing to the MLS within 1 business day of marketing it publicly. This new option, it allows for a period of delayed marketing before the listing has to go on the MLS.
So what does that mean in a practice?
Well, it's kind of up in the air right now.
How so?
The actual impact of this decision is going to depend on how local MLS organizations decide to enforce clear cooperation moving forward.
Okay, so it could vary from place to place.
Exactly. And Flackner and Miller, they've outlined 3 potential scenarios.
Okay, what are they?
The first scenario is basically business as usual.
So things stay pretty much the same.
Yeah, a lot of brokerages and agents will probably just keep doing what they're doing, which is listing properties on the MLS right away. Following the spirit of clear cooperation as it's been understood.
Right.
But as Flackner pointed out, this really hinges on local MLSs actually enforcing the policy.
So if they're strict about it, we probably won't see a huge change.
Right, because the MLS still provides the best way for both buyers and sellers to see what's out there.
Right. Everyone benefits from that broad exposure.
Exactly. But then you've got the second scenario, and this one's a bit more concerning.
What's that?
It's been dubbed walled gardens.
Walled gardens. Interesting name.
Yeah, so the idea is that if local MLSs don't really enforce clear cooperation very strongly, you could see these big brokerage firms deciding to keep their listings off the MLS for a while.
Really?
Yeah, they'd market them internally first, like as office exclusives.
So only their own agents would have access to them.
Exactly. And then maybe after a certain period of time, they'd put them on the MLS. But Jack Miller, he's suggesting that this could lead to even more consolidation in the real estate industry.
How so?
Well, think about it. If all the big players are hoarding their listings, the smaller independent brokerages, they're going to have a really hard time competing.
Right, because they won't have access to the inventory.
Exactly. And they rely on the MLS to connect with buyers and sellers. So this walled garden approach, it raises some serious questions about fairness and transparency.
Yeah. If a lot of properties are being hidden from the open market, it hurts buyers who might miss out on opportunities.
Absolutely.
And it hurts smaller brokerages who depend on that MLS cooperation.
Right. And we even saw a headline that said, private listings offer no benefits to sellers.
Huh. So who does it benefit then?
Yeah, it makes you wonder if it's really in the best interest of the clients, or if it's more about the brokerages trying to gain more power.
Okay, so what's the third scenario?
The third scenario is something Flackner calls federated listings.
Federated listings, okay.
So in this situation, if the MLS starts to lose its grip on clear cooperation, you might see smaller real estate companies banding together,
interesting,
forming alliances, maybe partnering with specific platforms to pool their listings together.
So they can compete with the big guys.
Exactly. They do creating their own mini MLSs, basically. Flackner admits that this could be a bit messy, more fragmented.
Right, instead of one big MLS.
Yeah, but he thinks it would be a better outcome for consumers and smaller companies than the walled garden situation.
Because at least there would still be some competition.
Right, and buyers and sellers would have more choices. So it seems like real estate professionals, they really need to pay attention to what their local MLS is doing.
Yeah.
How they're going to enforce clear cooperation and be ready to adjust their strategies accordingly.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's touch on another interesting trend, the changing idea of the forever home.
Oh, what's happening there?
Well, a Bright MLS survey, they found that almost a third of homeowners who are planning to sell in 2025, they've only lived in their current homes for less than 5 years.
Wow, so much for forever.
Right, and most of these folks, they're in their 30s and 40s, which is a big difference from the past, People used to stay in their homes for an average of 12 years.
Right, things have definitely shifted.
They have, so why are people moving so much more often?
Well, data from Open Door suggests that a lot of Millennials and Gen Z sellers,
They see their homes as investments or stepping stones. Rather than places they're going to live in for decades. It's like they're always thinking about their next move.
Yeah, playing the real estate game.
Exactly. And older generations, they're still more likely to hold on to that forever home idea. But this shift in mindset among younger owners, it could lead to a much more active housing market.
Right, more transactions, more churn.
Yeah, and it could also change the types of properties that are in demand.
Like maybe smaller, more starter type homes will be more popular.
Potentially, and this more transactional approach to homeownership, it could also have an impact on iBuyers and traditional real estate agents.
How so?
The Bright MLS survey, they found that younger sellers, they're often more willing to prioritize convenience over getting the absolute highest price. Like 68% of millennials and Gen Xers said they'd be okay sacrificing some profit if it meant a smoother, faster sale. So this could be good for iBuyers, like Open Door, because they offer that quick, easy sale.
Right, no hassle.
But it might also put pressure on traditional agents, because if sellers aren't as focused on squeezing out every last dollar, they might be less willing to pay those traditional commissions.
So agents will need to adapt.
Exactly. And it really highlights how different generations have different priorities when it comes to buying and selling homes.
Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach anymore.
Right. So you have to really understand your client and what's important to them. Now, even with all these changing dynamics, the issue of affordability, it's still a major factor.
It's always going to be a factor.
It is. And Redfin reported that the typical monthly payment for a U.S. home buyer, it hit a record high of $2,802.
Wow. That's a lot of money every month.
It is. And this was for the 4 weeks ending March 30th. So pretty recent data. And this is being driven by a combination of rising sale prices, which are up 3.4% year over year, and mortgage rates that are still hovering around 6.65%.
So even though we're seeing more activity in some areas, the cost of getting into a home is still a big barrier for a lot of people.
Absolutely. It's a tough market to crack. But there are some signs that buyers are still out there, actively looking.
Oh, yeah. What are you seeing?
Well, mortgage purchase applications are ticking up. More people are scheduling home tours, and Google searches for homes for sale are on the rise too. And the World Property Journal, they also pointed out that new home listings are up significantly. 7.5% year over year.
So more inventory coming onto the market.
Yeah, potentially, which is good news for buyers.
It is.
But when it comes to pending home sales, it's kind of a mixed bag.
What do you mean?
Well, the World Property Journal, they highlighted an overall increase in pending sales in February. Based on data from NAR. But Redfin, they reported a 2.3% year-over-year decline.
Oh, so sales are actually down compared to last year.
Yeah, which suggests that those high costs, they're still making some buyers hesitate.
That makes sense.
And it seems like the regional differences are pretty stark too. The World Property Journal, again citing NAR data, they said that the South saw a really big jump in pending sales in February. But the Northeast and the West, they actually saw declines. So it really goes to show you that the national housing market, it's not a monolith.
Right. What happens in one region might be totally different from what's happening in another region.
Exactly. And local expertise is still incredibly important.
Absolutely.
So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From this surprising rise of boomer buyers to the economic uncertainty of these new tariffs, to all the changes happening within the real estate industry itself.
Like the clear cooperation policy and the shorter homeowner tenures.
Exactly. So if we had to pick one truly surprising insight from everything we've discussed, what would you say stands out the most?
I think for me,
the most surprising thing is how quickly and dramatically baby boomers, armed with all their cash, have taken over the housing market. Like, they're actually buying more homes than millennials, even though millennials are a much bigger generation.
It is surprising.
It really is. And it shows just how much wealth is concentrated in the boomer generation.
Right. And how much influence they have on the market right now.
Absolutely. It's something we all need to be aware of. So what's the key takeaway for our listeners? You know, the real estate pros who are out there every day trying to make sense of all this.
I think the biggest takeaway
is that you have to really understand these generational shifts, especially the power of these cash-rich boomer buyers. And you have to stay informed about how these new tariffs might affect both construction costs and interest rates.
Absolutely. Those are crucial factors.
And don't forget about all the changes happening within the industry itself.
Right, like the clear cooperation stuff.
Yeah, and the fact that people are staying in their homes for shorter periods of time. And younger sellers, they really value convenience.
Yeah, speed and ease are becoming more important.
Exactly. So real estate professionals need to be flexible and adapt their strategies to meet those changing needs.
For sure. It's a dynamic market out there.
It is. So as you can see, the real estate market in April 2025, it's a pretty complex picture. We've got these demographic shifts, economic uncertainty, and industry changes all happening at the same time.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is. But we hope that this deep dive has given you a clearer understanding of these key trends and maybe equipped you with some valuable insights for your business. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What stands out to you most from all of this? What questions are these insights raising for your business? We encourage you to keep exploring these topics and adapt your strategies accordingly. And be sure to join us next time for another in-depth look at the forces shaping the world of real estate.
If you're interested in your own personalized edition of The Wire, please visit us at thewire.fm/custom. We offer market-specific podcasts with all the latest real estate news and market analysis delivered to you weekly or monthly. Own your market with a personalized edition of The Wire, The Week in Real Estate. Thank you for listening.